Hi everyone, I'm Annie Schreck and I'm the botanical researcher here at Mountain Crest Gardens. Now, down the line, succulents can start looking a little lackluster. You may have noticed problems with rot or losing leaves, and the fact is, a lot of these common succulent struggles actually come down to the soil they're planted in. So in today's video, we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of succulent soil, and by the end of it, you're going to know exactly what to look for in a mix, as well as how to make your very own at home. So let's get started. Now, if you ever see succulents growing in the wild, they're not growing in some beautiful, black, rich soil. What you actually see is them growing in these just extreme environments, a really rocky, sandy soil, or like this one, just growing out of the crack in a boulder. And the crazy thing about this is that this is what they like. This is what a succulent is adapted to. So really key when we're making our own succulent soil for cultivation at home or in the garden is to try to mimic these natural conditions, because that's what they're used to. To mix the perfect succulent soil, we're going to need both organic matter and non-organic matter. And side note, when I say organic matter, I'm not talking about like organic vegetables that you might find at the market or something. I actually mean something that was once alive. So for soil, that could be something like leaves from a tree that have fallen, died, broken down, and turned into soil. And on the other hand, of course, we have the non-organic things that have never been alive. So that includes things like rocky, mineral, sandy grits. And they're providing a super important function in a succulent soil. We actually want a really high proportion of these because they're helping to keep our soil light. They're creating all these lovely pockets of air, helping water drain away, and just keeping our succulents from rotting or anything like that. Now, succulents are still plants, and so they do need a little bit of that organic matter. Obviously, it's going to be a lot less than you might use for soil for growing vegetables or more leafy houseplants. Organic matter is really great at holding onto water and supplying the nutrients that a plant needs to grow. So we are still going to use some of that. But in order to strike the perfect balance between these two, we're going to need our DIY succulent soil recipe. Now, the thing that I really like about making your own succulent soil is that it can actually be easier and cheaper and better suited to your plants and your climate than something you get pre-made at the store. So, allow me to Martha Stewart this up here. Let's get mixing. Here's the recipe we're working with today, and it's a doozy, so get ready. 1 part of our organic matter for every 2 parts of the mineral grit. That soil is going to be pretty gritty, it's going to be well draining, and it's going to keep your succulents from getting too soggy, too rotten, and too dead. I'm going to do a really simple one right here today. So I'm going to use potting soil. This is a great one because you probably already have a bag of it at home. And let's go for about a cup of potting soil. For my super simple one, let's mix it with 2 parts of perlite. This is a volcanic glass actually, and it's lovely, it's really light, it's a little dusty. When I mix that together, you can see it's a lot of perlite, and that's the biggest thing. You may be shocked by just how much mineral grit you're adding. Don't be afraid, lean into the grit. This is a gritty mix, it's gonna be well draining, and that's what your succulents are absolutely going to love. But this is a general all-purpose recipe, and you can mix and match. So I'm gonna give you a bunch of different ingredients. You could use multiple different types of each one. Do what works for you, what you have access to. So some other great mineral grit options are the sands. Make sure you're using a coarse sand. So I really like things like building sand or paver sand. They're really great. They're a nice gritty mix. Avoid beach sands, like don't just head down to the ocean with a bucket, because that sand is very salty and it will kill your plants. So no beach sand. This guy here, this is decomposed granite, and it's got a similar sandy texture, but just this lovely orange color. That's a great option. And then getting a little larger here, this is your gravel, and you can definitely use gravel in your succulent soil. You just want to make sure it's a pretty small diameter of grit. So I'd stay with something around 1/8 of an inch around there. Some gravels are really dusty. So if you take out your gravel and there's just plumes of dust, give it a rinse off first, because the problem with that is that all of that dust can actually fill all of these lovely air pockets that we've worked so hard to create, and it's actually gonna make your soil heavier. Also, kind of gritty is chicken grit. And this guy, you might be able to find at a feed store. It's used for feeding chickens, but it's also great in succulent soil. It's basically doing the same thing as your gravel, but it's got this lovely pink color. So I really like chicken grit to use as a top dressing. It makes arrangements look really polished. So that's kind of a double whammy ingredient, if you will. Now, on the other side of things, we've got our organic options. I used a potting soil. A lot of potting soils, one of the main ingredients in them is something called forest products, bark mulch, broken down leaves, anything tree related. But on that same vein, you maybe have your own compost bin. You can absolutely use some homemade compost in your succulent mix. Just make sure it's pretty well broken down. So these are all fairly broken. I don't have any big pieces of wood or anything like that. And last of all here, this guy, coir, it's one of my favorites. This is a coconut coir. So it's made from the husks of coconuts, and usually that's just a waste product. But some smart person made it into soil. So this is ground up. It's really spongy, it's really light, and it's what we actually use here at Mountain Crest, and it just grows phenomenal succulents. So that's a pretty cool one. You can find it online pretty easily too. So coconut coir, I'm a big fan. I do have 2 ingredients that I would recommend you avoid. Vera vermiculite. Now, vermiculite, super easy to confuse with perlite. Names are very similar, but they do the opposite things. The reason we loved our perlite here is because she's really well draining, she's really light. The vermiculite, unfortunately, actually stores water. And that's great for some plants, just not for our cactus and our succulents. So avoid vermiculite or any potting soils that have vermiculite in them. Next up is peaty here. Peat comes from sphagnum peat bogs. So it's a really spongy, water-holding organic material, and also you find it in a lot of potting soils. The problem with peat, here is that he's hydrophobic. Hydro is water, phobic, afraid of. Basically what happens is when it's dry, it repels water. And because of the way that we water succulents, we let them dry out and then we drench them. Every time you do that, that dry peat is gonna repel the water, it's gonna spill all over, and water's not actually gonna saturate down into your roots. So really, peat is more hassle than it's worth. So avoid straight peat or any peat-based potting soils when you're working with succulents and cacti. There is your general recipe, but there are definitely ways that you can make this hyper adapted to your climate and to your plants. Now, first of all, let's say you live in a really wet climate. Maybe you're in the Pacific Northwest, maybe you're in Florida, could be really humid. This is a time when you can get away with very gritty soil. That extra grit is going to be great for these wet climates where you really are just trying to avoid rot no matter what. Also great for indoors if you don't have a lot of airflow, if you're in a small space, you're not getting a lot of sunlight. All of these things that encourage rot, you can counteract that by adding extra grit. And then on the other hand, maybe you live in the desert. Maybe it's super hot, dry, and sunny, and your succulents are constantly drying out. Well, have I got news for you? You can just tweak the ratio. Add a little bit extra of that organic matter, and you're gonna find that your soil stays wet for longer periods of time. So those are great climate tweaks, but also not all succulents are the same. And this 1 part organic to 2 part mineral is a great general place to start, but you may find that some varieties you have like a little more organic or like a little more mineral components in them. This little cutie, this is a golden barrel cactus, and as you can imagine, cactus, it's from the desert. It likes things real dry, but also really gritty. So if you're growing cactus, you can get away with extra grit. And the same goes for things like the Misems, the South African mimicry plants like lithops. They love grit, so you could go even higher than two parts of grit on that guy. This here, little lady Della, she's a Delosperma, and she's growing outside. So your outdoor succulents, they're a lot more forgiving in terms of your soil ratio. So you can definitely get away with more organic matter in an outdoor succulent. Things like your Delosperma, things like your hardy sedum, the stone crops, because they're planted in the ground instead of in a container, they've got a greater volume of soil to just let water run away from, so they can handle that extra kind of spongy organic matter. There's a lot of details, there's a lot of ways you could adapt this recipe, and maybe your response to that is, no, ain't nobody got time for that. Well, you're in luck because you have another option. Now, you can find a ton of succulent cactus mixes right at the garden center, pre-made commercial mixes, and that's a great, simple way to go, but you should know there's a huge variety out there across the country and across brands. So I'm gonna give you a couple tips what to look for so that you're picking the right commercial succulent soil. While you're still in the store picking them out, all you gotta do is turn it over, and just like anything you'd find at the grocery store, these have an ingredients list right on them. They're listed by quantity. So first up in this one, we've got pumice. Awesome. Love it when the first ingredient is a mineral grit. Next up are very mysterious forest products. But then third, sphagnum peat moss. Wah, wah. So this could be a good soil for another project, but because of the peat in there, I'm not going to use it with succulents. All right, so now let's say I found a soil, I've checked the ingredients, I've brought it home, everything's looking good. But you can still test your soil before you actually plant in it. So I'm gonna do that here today. And I'm picking up the actual pot that I'm gonna use to plant in. And all I'm gonna do is start filling it with soil. I'm basically just doing a mock planting here with everything except the plant. So fill her up. Get down and dirty, make a mess, it's fun. So, next up, I need to water this, and I'm gonna water it the same way I would as if there were a succulent in here. So I wanna drench it. I really wanna saturate that soil. Okay, good and wet. And now I'm gonna put this right where I'm ultimately gonna keep the plant. So maybe that's on a windowsill, at my office, at my desk, and I'm gonna pay attention to it and see how long it takes to dry out. Now, if it takes more than 2 days, that is not the soil for me, or it just needs amendment. So I tend to find with these commercial bagged succulent cactus mixes, it takes about a 50-50 ratio of extra grit. So I'm gonna put half of the commercial cactus mix with an extra half of any of the grits we talked about before. That being said, there are definitely some types of soil that do not need amending. So I'm gonna share my favorite one with you. This guy is Bonsai Jack. And Bonsai Jack makes a bunch of different soils. This one is the gritty mix, the 1-1-1 mix, and it truly is the creme de la creme when it comes to succulents. And I really first fell in love with it one winter. I think I was trying to grow succulents in a small apartment, so dark, not enough airflow, winter, and everything was just constantly rotting out. So I tried out this super gritty mix and I've really stuck with it ever since. It's super well draining, and on top of that, I really like the way it looks. So you can see it's got a mix of colors in here, but these little orange bits, that's a calcined clay, and then it's got pine bark fibers mixed in. So it's a really great mix. It's kind of the best you can get, and I'll leave a bunch of links down below of where you can find it online. Now, if you are looking for some adorable succulents like this tiny little bear paw here, go ahead and head over to mountaincrestgardens.com. We've got hundreds of these who really deserve nothing more than to live with someone who understands the importance of a really well-draining, gritty succulent soil. And if you want to learn more, you can find a bunch more informational guides there, and of course more juicy succulent videos like this one. Just be sure to subscribe and click the bell. And go ahead and leave me a comment below if you have an idea of something you'd like to learn more about with succulent care. And until next time, happy succulenting.